Our interview this morning is with Rick W. Huggins. Rick was born in Houston, Texas, April of 1957. He served in the United States Army from 1980 until 1986. His highest rank attained was Captain, '03. This interview was conducted at Burleson, Texas on Friday, October the 26th, year 2012. My name is Dale Dexheimer. I'm not related to Rick in any way. Also in the room we have Milton Gibson and Gary Burton as videographers, and we have Tim Hughes, who is a representative of the city of Burleson. This interview is conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and for Operation Remember, Burleson, Texas. And with that intro, Rick, we'll let you tell us your story of when you were in the U.S. military, sir.
Okay. Well, I graduated from Burleson High School in 1975. I went from kindergarten through high school in Burleson. I lived most of my, almost all my life up to then in Burleson. After graduation, I went to Texas A&M University. I decided to join the Corps. I'm not sure, well, I do know why I chose Texas A&M. I actually was probably a Longhorn fan for quite a while, and up until middle school, and then my dad took me to an Aggie game, and I fell in love with the place. I fell in love with the traditions and the Corps cadets, the band, and all of the great stuff they got going on down there. And so, and besides, I wanted to, at that time, my career choice was to be a veterinarian. So they had the only vet school in Texas at the time, and so that's where I decided to go. And when I went there, I wanted to be part of all of the traditions, so I decided to go into the Corps Cadets. I really didn't have any idea that I was going to go into the Army, into the military after that. My idea was I was going to go through my 4 years and as what they call D&C, which was drill and ceremony only in the Corps Cadets. And everyone took ROTC for their first 2 years, and then after that you could decide whether you're going to accept a commission or just go D&C. So that was my plan, and I'm not sure exactly why I decided, but early in my senior year, I decided that I wanted to try out the Army. I wanted to maybe go into the reserves, but I wanted to get my commission. So they had a catch-up plan in ROTC. I went through that, and then went through the ROTC summer camp up at Fort Riley, Kansas, and it kind of bit me. I liked it. It was 6 weeks of just doing all of this, learning all the things that the Army does, and I really enjoyed it, and decided that when I got back I was going to try to get a regular active duty commission. So when I graduated, that all worked out, and I graduated with a degree in chemical engineering, and got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Corps of Engineers. And from there I went to Fort Belvoir, Virginia for 3 months of the officers training school. I forget, junior officers training school, I think they call it, where we learned how to be a lieutenant, how to be a platoon leader in the Army, learned what the Corps of Engineers did and what they, all the different things that you needed to have a basic understanding of leadership in the Army and in the Corps of Engineers. So after that was over with, I went to airborne school, just kind of a thing that they offered young officers that you could do. It was a 3-week school at Fort Benning, Georgia, and so I jumped out of airplanes with parachutes, and that was a little scary. It was a little fun. They had at the end, you jump one night jump, and I like to joke that all of mine were night jumps because my eyes were closed every time. But anyway, completed that. That was interesting, and then came home for a little while. I had about 30 days before they shipped me off to West Berlin in Germany. And I started off really as my first assignment, real assignment there in Berlin. Back then, that was 1980, and of course the wall was still up. The West Berlin was, well, there was a lot of history there. It was a very interesting place to be as a young lieutenant. I was always interested in history, and there was just a lot of World War II history there with the Nazi regime and all of that. There were, now, when at the end of World War II, the Soviets and the Americans, French, and British all divided up Berlin into 4 sectors. What became West Berlin was the sectors of the U.S., the British, and the French. The U.S., I believe we were in the south, British in the middle, and up in the north were the French. I may have that backwards, but but the East Berlin was the Russian sector, the Soviet sector. And one interesting thing about that was you could go see Russian soldiers, Soviet soldiers every day if you wanted to. You could go see them. They were allowed to come into West Berlin. We were allowed to go into East Berlin and just go. We were encouraged to go to East Berlin to show the flag. Basically, you had to go in uniform. If you did the right things, there was no trouble. There were certain things that you could not do, but certain places you could not go. But if you did everything right, you could enjoy time over there, and likewise the Soviets could come into our sector. Now they came into our sector a lot to spy on us. We knew that, and they always suspected us of spying on them. But which we probably did. I didn't, but I'm sure that went on. But Berlin was a very interesting place, especially for a single lieutenant. There was, like I said, there was a lot of history there. There were people from all over the world that were in Berlin, that came to Berlin to work or to just enjoy some time there. I met Germans. I met people from the Far East, Singapore, I think Malaysia. There were a lot of people from Australia there that I met. And it was just, it was a real eye-opener to me to see, to get to meet that many different types of people. The Army was, in itself, was an interesting, I guess, a learning experience too, because you met people from all over the country and from all diverse backgrounds. And being from Burleson, Texas, there wasn't a lot of diversity here while I was growing up here. So it was a learning experience, and it was a really worthwhile learning experience. Berlin was West Berlin had quite a bit of nightlife, maybe a little bit too much nightlife, but it was, like I said, it was a really great place for a single person in the military to be. There was plenty to do there. We were respected there. At the time, it was not too long after the Vietnam era, and a lot of people weren't crazy about the military back then, and especially back in the United States. A lot of people in West Germany were not all that crazy about Americans, especially American soldiers. But in Berlin, when the residents there could see what was on the other side of the wall, they really appreciated our presence. We were right in the middle of East Germany. We were what kept them from falling into the Soviet influence in the Eastern Bloc countries. And they really appreciated it. I remember there were every, I forget what they call it, Armistice Day, or I believe it was in May. They always had a parade with the French and the British and the Americans all participating. And we would, it was mostly the infantry and the armored folks and maybe some of the artillery that were in the parade. I always sat in the stands and watched, and there were students that came in from West Germany that would, usually you could tell who they were and you knew what they were going to do, and as soon as the Americans came up, they would run out into the street and try to stop the parade. And of course the Berlin police knew exactly who they were too, and they cleaned them up within minutes. And the thing that struck me when I saw that was not that the students were doing that, but all of the anger in the West Berlin crowd, the West Berliners that were watching the parade, and how they were angry at those students for doing that. And it gave me a real appreciation for what I was there for. Another thing that, a funny thing about, or interesting thing about those parades too, the Soviets, the Russian soldiers came over and watched the parade too. I don't know if it was just to be part of the ceremony or to spy and see what we had in our arsenal or whatever, but they were there. And we would put our biggest, meanest soldiers as their escort. And that soldier would make sure that every time the American flag came by, that Soviet officer had to salute, and he would elbow him in the side and make sure that he respected our flag and the flags of the British and French. And one of those soldiers was one of our guys from Kentucky. He was a big old guy, and we just laughed about that when we heard about it. But that was fun. Another interesting thing that happened in Berlin was I was there when President Reagan made his visit to Berlin, and all of us were out at that was the biggest thing in our circles there, preparing for that visit for months and months. We all, except essential personnel, all went out to Tempelhof Airfield and watched Air Force One come in, and President Reagan got out and reviewed our soldiers in formation and came and spoke to us for about 10 or 15 minutes. And it wasn't there, but it was it was in Berlin, that visit, that he made another speech at a different part of the town where he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." That was a famous line from him. And he was very well appreciated by the soldiers there, and they really loved it that he came to see us. I think he went on to other parts of the city. There were protests again from students that came in from West Germany, and we never really interfered much in the affairs of the German citizens. We never, although we were an occupying force, we could direct their police in what to do from time to time. There was one time when President Reagan was there and he was giving a speech somewhere, there was a group of students that were starting to make their way and protest toward that area. And I remember our general or people in charge told the Berlin police to stop it, and boy, they did. they stopped it cold. But anyway, that's a great memory that I had there. While I was there, I was a platoon leader in the combat engineering company. I was there for about, I was a platoon leader for, say, about a year, maybe a year and a half. After that, I went to the plans department there, the war plans staff agency, and got to work on war plans that were actually part of the defense of Berlin should the Eastern Bloc ever try to invade. That was very interesting job. I guess I got to work on that for about 6 months, and then after that I worked in the Department of Engineering and Housing, and that was another good experience. Got to work with a lot of good German people, a lot of good German engineers there in Berlin. So, and after my 3 years was up, I tried to get an extension and stay there a little bit longer, but they had other soldiers that wanted to get there too. So I had to come back to the United States and go through my advanced officers training in Fort Belvoir for about 6 months there. And that's where I met my wife. She was she worked for Senator Nichols from Oklahoma in Washington, D.C. Met her there at a church, and we got engaged and married back the next April. And then after that, we went to, after my training was up there, I went to Fort Hood, Texas, where I started out there in the 62nd Engineering Battalion as was assigned as the engineering equipment officer, engineering equipment maintenance officer. They called me the EMO. Fort Hood was a far cry from Berlin as far as a destination duty there, but I learned what the real Army was all about there at Fort Hood. The motor pools, the formations, the barracks inspections, and whatnot. And, I was the EMO for about a year, and then I took over as a Charlie Company commander, as a company commander there in the 62nd Engineering Battalion after a year there. And the command duty lasted for a year and a half for company commanders, and that was the best job I ever had in the military. Maybe the best job I've ever had. Period. It was great. I got to work with outstanding group of men and group of. We had actually 2 women in our unit over my command, and they were top notch. Two women officers. They were top notch officers too. But the most impressive thing to me was all of the non-commissioned officers, the sergeants that worked for me, and several of them were from the Vietnam era. They had gone to Vietnam. My first sergeant was just excellent. He'd been through it all, and he had seen everything, and when anything was all going wrong, he was there to help fix it or help me figure out a way to fix it. First Sergeant Spears, I remember his name. Great guy. But I guess while we were there, the only thing that really came up as far as a conflict, there was only 3 things that ever came up, I think, that involved any kind of conflict. One was Grenada. I had been at Fort Belvoir at that time. I did know some people a friend or two that went to Grenada. A ranger that was an officer that I went to school with at A&M, and he had been in Grenada. And interesting thing, I had asked him. He was a tough ranger. I thought, were you scared? When you're flying in there? And he said, I can't tell you the words he used, but yes, he was definitely afraid on the way in there. And And that was just good, honesty from him. I think anybody would be, and they'd have to be. But he got through it, and gave me a pretty good account of what happened there. I believe the Panama invasion happened while I was at Fort Hood. That didn't really involve anybody that I knew. And the only other thing that we came close to being deployed for was that when I was a company commander there at Fort Hood, the Mexico City earthquake happened. And we had a plan in our war plans division that if need be, we would send actually the company commander and the executive officer from my company to that area. And we got ready to go and, if we needed, to go scope out the area and see what the people there would need to help them get out of it. But we were never needed to go, so that we didn't deploy there either. So that's pretty much it. There was I never got bullets fired at me. I guess the closest thing that ever came to any danger was while I was visiting the East with a friend of mine in East Berlin. He wanted to go up real close to the wall, the Berlin Wall on the east side, and that was not allowed. And we did, and we came back, and we had an East German border guard with his German Shepherd escort us back to my car. So that was about the closest I ever came to any danger. And I look back on my Army career. I don't know why I chose the Army over the Navy or Air Force. I think it was just my friend. I think my friends maybe were going into the Army. Maybe that was it. But I really enjoyed my time in it. I learned a lot, had a lot of good experiences, and don't regret it a bit.
Good. Good story. A lot of detail there. Went to airborne school and jumped out of that perfectly good airplane?
I know. It doesn't seem logical, does it? But,
You think about that first step, the first time you did it, any feelings associated there? Or like you say, you just close your eyes and...
Well, before you jump out of the airplane, you have 2 weeks of pretty vigorous training, and I think when part of that is to get you to where you don't want to step back and not jump, because you've been through all the push-ups and all of the parachute training and what to do, and you do, by the time you jump out of the plane, you know what to do before you do it. You know what to expect. You know that if something goes wrong, what to do, how to pull your reserve chute, that sort of thing. But it was interesting. I think when we were, loading up in the airplane, everybody's just got the butterflies in their stomach, and you don't want to admit it, but you get in, you sit down on the bench there in the plane, and then you just wait, and then you take off, and you look down the row, and it looks like everybody's sleeping. Nobody's sleeping. They're all praying, and because they've told you the statistics. The last time we lost an airborne soldier was back in 1959 or whatever. It's about a 1 in a million that you're going to have something happen, but you sitting there on that airplane, you think my number might be that millionth guy. But when you stand up in the plane, and maybe I hear this so many from people who've been in combat, that when they actually do it, their training takes over. But you hook up your hook to the line and shuffle on up to the door. And I was nervous up until I could look out the door and see the ground below, and then I wasn't nervous, and it was easy to jump out at that point.
Now you went through a special, I guess it was just for officers, your airborne training?
Well, It's a kind of benefit, maybe they don't do it anymore, but it's a kind of thing that they give officers the opportunity to do that, whether they're gonna be in a unit, an airborne unit or not.
It wasn't regular airborne training, though. It was an abbreviated.
It was the 3-week airborne training that everybody who is going to go into an airborne unit, they go through that training at Fort
Okay.
Benning.
How many jumps did you make, do you know offhand?
5.
5? Okay.
5 jump.
4 during the day and 1 at night?
1 at night.
You went to Berlin in 1980. Were there still signs of World War II? Physical signs?
There were mainly museums, but we went to the place where Hitler's lair had been. You could see that. There weren't any burned out tanks or anything like that. Mainly there was, the thing that was there was the museums and artifacts that you could look at and see where Hitler hung the generals that he thought were involved in his assassination attempt. But they're physically probably not any.
You said there was interaction. You went east, Soviets came west, moved freely, pretty much?
Pretty much.
You have to go through a checkpoint when you went to the other side?
Yes, sir. You went through Checkpoint Charlie. Checkpoint Charlie is the famous landmark, really, for Berlin. I think the Soviets would have to go through there too, but Americans, British, and French would all have to go through Checkpoint Charlie to get to visit the other side. We did have a mission. They called it the mission. It was in East Berlin. It was where some of our spies did go, and some of our intelligence people did go. Now, they were only allowed to go into certain areas. In fact, I can't remember his name, but there was a major there that was an intelligence officer at the time. He was at the mission, and it was a house that was in East Berlin, and they had operations going on from there. Now, while I was there, I got to go on a tourist trip to Russia, and his wife went on the trip too. He was going to make the trip, but he didn't. They revoked his visa at the last minute because they found out that he was part of the intelligence field. We'd gone to Leningrad at the time and Moscow, and then we came back. But when I got back to Fort Hood, I think it was Fort Hood at that time, it was on the news. Remember Reagan was president, but that major had gone off and observed some field operations by the Soviet and the East German military. He was in a place he shouldn't have been, was not supposed to be, but again, it was part of his job to spy on him. A Russian soldier saw him and shot him and killed him there. His driver tried to render aid to him. The soldier wouldn't even let him do that. He was going to shoot the driver too. But
Wow.
it was just it was a stark contrast between the Soviet bloc and our people. That could tell you right there what kind of military they were, what kind of leadership they had.
If we go back to you cross into their side, they come into our side. Were there things that were available in East Germany that you wanted, or East Berlin that you wanted?
Well,
And did the Soviets, I would think we had more to offer in the way of physical goods, pound of bacon, quart of milk, whatever they might want to take back. Or did they have enough money to buy anything when they came over?
I think that's it. I don't think they had the money to buy anything. Now, I think that they could go into our commissary or our PX. We could go into the British and French PX while we were there. I think that they would have the opportunity to. I'm not sure. But I never saw any Soviet officers or anybody in our facilities.
Just from memory, Rick, I get the impression that they were economically depressed compared to what we had in the West, and I would think if they had the money, they would have been anxious to buy some Western goods.
I think they would have. Now, where we did see that was when we crossed over, going from West Berlin to through the corridor. They allowed us to drive through a corridor down a highway through East Germany to West Germany. And at those checkpoints, checkpoint Alpha and checkpoint Bravo, their soldiers would ask us for things. They'd a pen. They would. There was a time where we could buy belt buckles from them, Soviet belt buckles, and for 20 or 40 Deutschmarks. They were showing their capitalistic side there. But so they were depressed, and you could tell. And that's one reason a lot of people like to shop over in East Berlin, because goods were cheap over there. We would trade our dollars for East German marks, and you could buy quite a bit with them. There wasn't a lot of things that were really nice, but I remember I bought a nice down comforter over there one time for a fraction of what it would cost in the West.
The time you were in Berlin, this corridor that you just mentioned, Berlin was still being supplied, I guess, by truck?
I guess so.
Of course,
by
the
air
airlift
and
was
by-
long gone, but
Right.
everything had to come from the West.
Pretty much, I would think so. Yes, they were supplied by truck. They could they could come in by train too.
Okay.
We did have a duty train that we could get on. Now, as far as commerce in West Berlin, I think they could just go through normal procedures. The civilians could go through normal procedures that you would going from country to country,
Okay.
and ship goods and in and out on the highways, through the highways and the rails.
Let me jump. You got married. You're from Burleson. Where's your wife from?
My wife's from Nebraska.
From Nebraska. And you got married in?
We got married in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Okay, so you went to her family's?
Her home.
Okay, her
Mhm.
home, yes,
Mhm.
okay. Married in uniform?
Yes, got married in
Full
uniform.
dress with a sword and a
Dress
whole?
uniform. I didn't have a sword. My ushers did, I think. Yeah, they did. Some of my friends from the Army came, and they were in full uniform too.
You mentioned when you got back to Fort Hood, you got to see the real Army. I guess what does that say about your time in Berlin? That was the unreal, or it was
Well, they like to call Berlin the Spitshine Army, because
Okay.
a lot of it was for show.
okay?
You did have a lot of parades and things like that. You had to look your best. If you were ever going through the checkpoints, you had to look, you had to be dressed right, had to have your vehicles. We would go to West Germany to do training for about 5 weeks at a time or something, about twice a year. And when we did, we had to go through the corridor, through checkpoint Bravo and Alpha, and you had to have your trucks looking great. I mean, I remember soldiers using baby oil to get them shiny. It was unbelievable. And so now we did some training too, and we did some construction there as engineers, but it was nothing like what was going on back at Fort Hood or out in West Germany, where I call it the real Army was. I don't want to insult any any of my time in Berlin, but it just wasn't the same.
Okay. You were a company commander, best job you ever had, maybe in your entire life. How many men in a company?
I believe there's supposed to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 150.
Okay.
We would usually have 120. We were never fully
And you were
staffed
in an engineering company.
up. Combat, they called it a combat heavy company. It was which means it is a construction company.
Okay.
We had some
Did
construction
you ever take,
vehicles.
did you ever take any of that Army experience? Did it translate into your civilian job when you got out, Rick?
I would say a lot of the technical things, no, but the planning thing,
The discipline of the planning?
the discipline of the planning, we were taught oh goodness, now I can't remember what it is, but how you plan to construct projects, what things go in parallel and what things come at, what goes after what, and what you can do all at the same time. But that came in handy from time to time.
Couple questions here. As a company commander, you would have certainly been involved. This was an integrated unit, racially integrated?
I would say so. We had.
The Army was
Sure.
pretty much integrated and all of
Yeah.
that segregation business was pretty much gone?
Oh, definitely,
Okay.
definitely, yeah.
Drugs, problem to you as a company commander?
Uh,
Fair amount of marijuana or whatever it may have been?
I would say there was a fair amount. There were some drug problems. By that time, we had started, drug testing, and we'd have a random drug test, urinalysis test, about once every couple of months, and we'd almost always have some positives show up on that, so that we would have to start if it was their first time, they would go through rehab. We would have to get that going, and we did have one soldier, not in my company, but in another company, that had just got there at Fort Hood, and he overdosed and died. So I wouldn't say that there was, the drug problem was gone, but it was still there. It wasn't. I wouldn't say it was a major distraction, a major problem.
As a company commander, did you administer justice? I was Navy and we had captain's mast.
Mm-hmm.
The old man was the boss and he was judge, jury, lock, stock, and barrel. As a company commander, if you found one of your troops with a drug problem, was he transferred out to a separate unit? Did someone else take care of his treatment and, even his prosecution, or did that fall under your?
It would fall under me if it was up to a certain rank. Now, if an E5 sergeant or above came, and of course that almost never happened, but if an E5 or above came positive on a drug test, that would go up to the battalion commander, the colonel. Now, I could, for an E4 and below, I could bust them down one rank. Now, and I did occasionally on that, do that, but.
Now, I suppose he was afforded due process, though. He could have an Army lawyer defend him.
That's true.
Okay, UCMJ, I guess, is
Uniform Code of Military
Yes.
Justice.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
that was the book, and that. Now, let's say a soldier got into trouble. Just as an example, maybe he did come up positive on a drug test, and I would issue an Article 15, which was what I could issue. So he would be afforded the opportunity to talk to me, and with representation, he could turn down the Article 15 to go to court-martial. So if he thought he had a good case, he would he might do that. And in fact, we almost had a soldier do that one time. He had talked with a lawyer, and it was not drug related, but he had talked to a lawyer about whether he should accept the Article 15 or go to court martial. And the lawyer advised him to go to court martial. And he started to, when we were going through the Article 15 proceedings, and he said, and I said, well, wait a minute, I kind of caught myself, and I wanted to know why he thought, why his lawyer thought that he was innocent. I wanted to know more details. So eventually we threw out the Article 15 because we thought he did have a case. He wasn't completely innocent, but he wasn't completely guilty either.
Okay. Well, you certainly had an interesting 6 years, sounds like. Ultimately, when you got out, you'd spent 6 years. You were probably a relatively senior captain. I mean, major wasn't that far out there somewhere. Mm-hmm. The decision to get out, why'd you finally decide to come back to the civilian side?
I guess a couple of reasons, that I just finished what everyone told me was the best job I'd ever have in the military, was a company commander. And I was starting a family. My first son was born while I was at Fort Hood. It was either decide once and for all then. You're either going to get out then, mm-hmm. or stay in for the 20 years or longer. And I just thought, for me, it was probably the best idea to get out and maybe grow a family and put down roots. I envied some of the guys that stayed in for a little while. I'd never regretted my decision, but I missed the camaraderie and the soldiers and such. Though it was a tough decision, but once I made it, there wasn't any looking back.
Have you ever attended any reunions or?
I got together with, not formally, a friend of mine that I'd been stationed with in Berlin. Got, about 10, 15 years ago, got promoted to full colonel down at Fort Hood. I went down there to see him, and there were a few people down there that I'd seen before in the Army, and I talked to him quite a bit. Never any real reunions with everybody in the unit, or anything like that.
Well, very good, sir. I thought it was a great interview. We heard a lot of things we've not heard before, and we appreciate your time in the service. We appreciate you spending the time with us this morning, Rick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to do it.